Last week we concluded where Avram Avinu passes away, and Yitzchak and Yishmael, his sons, bury him. Ve'ela told us Yitzchak ben Avram, and these are the children, or the chronicles of Yitzchak, the son of Avram. Avram holedus Yitzchak. Avram had given birth to Yitzchak, had fathered Yitzchak. So Rashi explains told us who are the children of Yitzchak. Yaakov and Esav, Hamurim beParsha. Yaakov and Esav, which are mentioned in the Parsha. The Ohr HaChaim HaKadosh makes a point over here. The Vav seems to be superfluous. It could have said, Eila told us Yitzchak ben Avram. What's Ve'ela? The Vav seems to be superfluous. And these are the children of Yitzchak ben Avram. What's the Vav? So he says something very interesting. Of the patriarchs, of the Avos HaKadoshim, what do we really know about Yitzchak? We don't know much about Yitzchak. We know that he was born to Avram at 100 years old. His mother was 90. He was taken to the Akedah. He did not resist his father. And the Torah shares with us the dialogue between Avram and Yitzchak going to the Akedah. They return. Yitzchak marries Rivka. And a little bit we speak about Yitzchak as a person. But in reality, we know very little about Yitzchak. As we know about all the ins and outs and all the experiences of Avram Avinu, how he'd gone to the kiln, how he left his homeland, and how he was a pariah, and how he did his espousing of monotheism, and all the stories. About Yitzchak, comparatively speaking, we know very little about him compared to Avram and Yaakov. So how do we know or have any inkling about the greatness of Yitzchak? Although we know he was patriarch. He fathered Yaakov and Esav. He was deceived by Yaakov, the tzaddik, the greatest of the patriarchs, to receive the blessings, the birthright, which he purchased. Rivka, the matriarch, doesn't share with him who Esav really was, although she knows who he was, because she's the one who encouraged Yaakov to take the brachos, the birthright, because she received the prophetic communication. Your son must go now immediately and take the birthright, otherwise he will lose it, and there's no chance to be a Klal Yisrael if Esav receives the birthright. So how do we really have any understanding, or where does the Torah shed any light on who Yitzchak was, his dimension of Kedusha, of holiness? So the Ohr HaChaim HaKadosh explains, this Vav, Ve'ela told us, Yitzchak ben Avram reveals it, because Vav is always the connecting letter. And we spoke about the life of Avram Avinu, which was something not to be fathomed, understood. He introduced monotheism to the world, and he took on the world single-handedly. The Eila told us Yitzchak is a continuum of his father's life. Through that Vav, that sheds light and tells us who Yitzchak was. This is the Ohr HaChaim HaKadosh. So I asked the question, why does the Torah only allude to it through a Vav? Let the Torah go and give us a full understanding of who Yitzchak was. How Avram did Chesed, how Yaakov did what he did. Why doesn't the Torah somehow flesh it out for us to give us an understanding of Yitzchak? We know, as it's stated in Chazal, that each of the three patriarchs assumed another attribute of Hashem. Avram was Chesed, Yaakov was Rachmim. Rachmim means his attribute was mercy. Yitzchak was exactness. He was exacting. He was so precise in everything he did, to the nth degree. Now, each of the Avos HaKadoshim, holy patriarchs, assumed that. Why? Because in the Shemon Esrei, we say, Hakel, Hagodol, Hagiba, Vanora. We speak about Hashem in terms of the way he interacts with this existence. He's Godol, is Chesed. Gibor, power, is the attribute of justice. Nora is awesome. That's the attribute of Rachmim. So when we say Elokei Avraham, each one of the patriarchs assumed another attribute profile, emulating Hashem. That means each of them related to Hashem and presented God in another light in his existence. There was, as if Chas v'Sholom, there were three different aspects of God. Elokei Avram. Avram displayed one attribute of Hashem. Yitzchak, the way he lived his life, he displayed another attribute of Hashem. Elokei Yaakov, it was another attribute, because otherwise the question which is asked, it should say Elokei Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov. It's the same God of each one of the patriarchs. So why, when we speak of each of the patriarchs, and every time Hashem introduces himself in the Torah, I am Elokei Avram, I am Elokei Yitzchak, I am Elokei Yaakov. I am Elokei Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov. I'm the God of Avram, Yitzchak. The answer is because each of them displayed another aspect of Hashem through the way they conducted their lives, whether it was through chesed, through the precision of their own behavior and their service, and through rachmim. That's how it's explained. Then we say, Hagodol, Hagiba, Vanora. And what are the attributes of Hashem? Chesed, din, and rachmim. Justice and rachmim. If I would ask you, describe to me what an angel is. Could you describe to me what an angel is? It's not possible. Yitzchak's dimension of being, in terms of the exactness of his service, it is impossible to understand who he was because of who he was. It was a dimension which is out of the realm of our grasp to be able to relate to what he was. So the Torah only reveals to us aspects of his life which has relevance to our understanding. He was the Akedah. He was the one, because he was the patriarch, the blessings were under his auspices, his dominance, to give it to whoever he chose. And the other few issues that which the Torah discusses. But outside of that, we cannot understand the personality. The personality was, he was removed from the world until a certain point, as we'll discuss later, because he had to focus on his own exactness of behavior, how to serve Hashem. Therefore, the only way the Torah alludes to tell us that he's the equivalent of Avram Avinu, the Eila told us. The Vav, the connecting Vav, means we spoke about Avram until now, and now we speak about Yitzchak. That's the connecting Vav, which means he's the equivalent as a patriarch as his father was. That's how we explained why the Torah doesn't fully describe in detail who Yitzchak was, because it's impossible. Because we have no relevance to even understand what an angel is. One moment. And who is Yitzchak? Yitzchak is Ben Avram. Avram holed is Yitzchak. Avram gave birth to Yitzchak. So, of course, the obvious question which Rashi addresses, if Yitzchak is the son of Avram, so it's obvious Avram is the father of Yitzchak. So what does her have to tell us Avram is the father of Yitzchak? So Rashi offers two possibilities, which is the Medrash. Svar b'acherim, la'acher shekora HaKadosh Baruch Hu shmo Avram. Only after Hashem added the hey to Avram's name, Akach holed es Yitzchak. Only then was he able to father Yitzchak. When he was Avram, the Zodiac said, Avram ein lo ben. When he added the hey, Avraham yesh lo ben. Sarai ein lo ben. Sarai will not have a son. Sarah yesh lo ben. Sarah will have a son. I mean, what is Torah telling me? I mean, if you read the narrative before, we understand. Hashem says to Avram, I'm adding, your name will be Avram, and now you'll be able to father the child. We understand, that's what it says. So what's the Torah reiterating? Avraham holed Yitzchak. You would say, when a person has a name change, what is the significance of the name change? Over here the Torah says, the reason why he was able to father Yitzchak, because Avraham holded his Yitzchak. What is the Torah telling us? Who is Yitzchak? Why did Hashem add that hey to Avram's name? So he should be able to father Yitzchak. If he wouldn't have added that hey to his name, Avram couldn't have fathered Yitzchak. It would have been an impossibility. Why? Because the Zodiac says Avram ein lo ben, Avraham yesh lo ben. So by adding the hey, how did the hey bring about the change? So I mentioned name of the Midrash. The Gemara tells us, which we once studied in Shabbos, based on a pasuk Tilim, ki b'ka Hashem tzur olamim. With the letters Yud Hey, Hashem formed the worlds. Tzur is tzier olamim, worlds. So the Gemara tells us that with the letter Yud, the spirituality within the letter Yud, God created the spiritual world. Olam haba. With the spirituality which lies within letter Hey, God created the physical world. So Hashem said to Avram, for you to be able to father a son who's going to be the future patriarch of the Jewish people, what it took to create the world, the spirituality of the Hey, to give you that ability, it's like recreating a world. That was the significance. It wasn't just adding a letter. It was the Hey itself is the equivalent of a new creation. What it took to bring about all existence, that's what it takes to bring about creation-wise, that you should have the ability to father Yitzchak. Meaning, Klal Yisrael is a different reality of existence. It has no relevance to the previous existence. This is so therefore the Torah is making a point over here. Yitzchak is the son of Avram, okay? And how did that come about? Avram holded his Yitzchak. By adding that hey to Avram's name, only that's the only reason why he was able to father Yitzchak. So what does it tell us about Yitzchak? Yitzchak was only able to come about, he's the equivalent, God had to recreate a new existence for Avram to be able to be the father of Yitzchak. So it gives us an understanding of who Klal Yisrael is, who are the founding fathers of Klal Yisrael. And as we mentioned, Avram is not a continuum of the previous existence, but rather Avram is the beginning of a new existence. That's what the pasuk concludes. Avram holded his Yitzchak. Dover Acher, another interpretation. Al Yidei Hakosov Yisrael Yitzchak Hukak Lomar Avram holded his Yitzchak. The Torah says, you know who fathered Yitzchak? Avram. But how do we know that? The Torah has to go qualify it, and it should be conclusive beyond any question. Because the scoffers, the deprecators of the generation were saying, that who did Sarah conceive the child from? From Avimelech. Why? She was Avram's wife for many years. She never became pregnant from him. And therefore, all of a sudden, she spends one night with Avimelech. All of a sudden, it becomes known she's expecting. So the way it could be read, there's no question, or there's a very serious question to ask, seems to be Avimelech is the father of Yitzchak, not Avram. And Avram is not so-called the successor of his father. So what did Hashem do? So he formed the facial features of Yitzchak to be identical. When I say identical, it means identical. We're meaning when you saw Yitzchak, he looked exactly like his father. Exactly. Ve'idu akol. And once that happened, everybody could attest to the fact Avram Holisi Yitzchak. Regardless of what the scoffers say, that Avimelech is the father of Yitzchak, there's no question. Definitely not. Because how is it possible that Yitzchak looks exactly like his father? So Shekosef Khan Yitzchak ben Avram. How do we know Yitzchak is the son of Avram? Sure, Edus, because there's irrefutable proof. Avram Holis Yitzchak, because Yitzchak looks exactly as his father. Okay? The Gemara tells us, we find in last week's parsha, that Avram was Zokein Bo Bayomim. He was aged, advanced in days. The first time the Torah speaks about Zikno, aging, was Avram. Avram Avinu was the first human being ever to age. And why did he age? Because Avram said to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to Hashem, people meet my son, and they address him by saying Master Avram, and when they meet me, they say Master Yitzchok. There's no way to discern between the two of us, and it's important for people to know who I am and who my son is. Especially, each of them had a different thrust in terms of how they influence existence. So Hashem says it's not a problem. We'll take care of it. Avram goes to sleep that night. The next morning he wakes up. He aged. Similar to the story of Rabbi Elazar ben Azari. He was 18 years old. He says, Anika ben Shivim Shona. He looked like a 70-year-old man. But there was for a different reason. But here, this was the reason. So Zikna aged because since he looked exact like his son, and his son looked like the father, therefore, that people should be able to discern clearly between the two of them, Avram had this aged look, and Yitzchok was younger. But nevertheless, before that, what did people say? And even after that, they said, we know he used to look exactly, couldn't tell the difference. But what is the value of that? Because since the scoffer said that Avram had not fathered Yitzchok, this was the conclusive proof he did. So we asked the question, how does Hashem allow that scenario to take place, that Sari Meni should be taken by Avimelech, and there's a whole question, what happens, is how did she conceive? Was it Avimelech, was it Avram? And now Hashem has to prove, when Yitzchok is born with the identical facial features, which is a miracle, that Yitzchok is Avram's son, and then he has to introduce aging to existence so people should be able to discern between Avram and his son. Not the whole story shouldn't have happened. Just simple understanding. A woman is holy as Sarime. Could you imagine? HaKadosh Baruch Hu allows a woman who's the equivalent of the Merkava. She's also, the Shechin is with Sarimenu. She was a greater prophetess than Avram Avinu. And to allow such a monster to even have her and put her in a position where he's going to rape her, how's this even to be conceived? And so afterwards, a miracle happens. And Avimelech admits it's not, I did not touch her. He gave her a gift, whatever it is. But why did Hashem allow it to happen? And because it happened, now, because the scoffers say that Sarah wasn't pregnant all these years, all of a sudden now she's pregnant, it must be Avimelech. And Hashem now has to respond to that issue. Avoid it with the whole discussion. Don't allow it to happen. That's the question I asked. So what I said was, in existence, whenever we speak about representations of good and evil, each one always has to have a counterbalance to counter the other. Because if there were to be a counterbalance to each one, representation of good and evil, people will have no choice. Avram Avinu, as we pointed out, the day that he passed away, that's the day that Nimrod was killed by Esav. Because the world cannot exist with a Nimrod without an Avram Avinu. Avram Avinu was the counterbalance to Nimrod. Avram passes away, Nimrod is killed the same day. If Yitzchok himself wouldn't be questioned who he is, he's the heir apparent, without any question, of his father. So the level of influence he would have on the world, he would tip the balance. His influence would be so overwhelming that people will not have a choice but to gravitate to Yitzchak's position, which was his father's position. So what does Hashem do? He allows the scenario to unfold. That Sori Menu is taken by Avimelech. And she spends a night. There's a question, what happened? What happened? All of a sudden, everybody knows now nothing happened. But something happened. Soon afterwards, it became known she was pregnant. Even though there's an answer and there's a response, Avram Holed is Yitzchok. But people say, I understand he looks exactly like his father. But why only after that night did it happen? And you know how people speak. You never know. You never know. He may look like his father, but you never know. So even if there's an iota of question, the question itself automatically undermines and diminishes the impact of Yitzchak's representation on the world scene. He no longer has that force of influence as Avram had. That's the reason why Hashem allowed this to happen, because otherwise it would have tipped the scales and Bechira wouldn't have been in a proper setting for people to make the choices. So Yitzchak had to look exactly like his father. Even though ultimately aging had to be introduced to existence because of this. But nevertheless, for the sake of, to address the objective of existence, which is free choice, there was no other way to go, or this is the approach Hashem chose, that it should be questioned. There's a response, but even if there's a response, there's always a question, because why only then did it happen and not earlier?